Jill. Now, I did ask Jill earlier, do you get teased a lot about being bigger women for independence? She said, not too bad. Because my husband's German. If you don't know that yet, you've obviously not been following my story. Because he's been driving me the now 3,700 and something or other miles that we've driven to meetings like this all over the place. And when the invite came in, because they were trying to get me to come in June, and it said Biggar Women for Independence, he thought it was another group. And as you can see, I am a bigger woman. So finally I've made it to my spiritual home. Now, all we're going to decide in a little over 2 weeks is just one thing. Are we going to take control of our futures? That's all it's about. Do we want to be in the driving seat? Do we want to make the decisions? Or just because the guys down the road went to a really, really, really posh school, that we think they must be cleverer than us, like Joe and Lana says. We're not up to it. We can't make decisions. Because that's all it's about, and a lot of the rest is distraction. And especially the stuff about politicians. Alex Salmon, God love him, is 60. You know, he's not going to be around for another 300 years. It's not relevant to this discussion. It's about us. Do we want to be in control? Do we want to know that whatever is happening in the future, we are in the driving seat? And to me, the NHS is a really important part of that. Now, some of you will know I've been being dragged through the media for the last couple of weeks, and I was warned a couple of days in advance that, as was tweeted by Better Together, I was going to be dealt with, and as you will see, I am being dealt with. But anyway, if they thought they would shut me up, they obviously hadn't bothered asking my husband. And I did spend a year and a half in Gaza working as a surgeon, and that's a wee bit tougher than the Daily Record gives me. So I'm still here, I'm booked right up to the wire, and I'll still be speaking at meetings. Anyway, I didn't start following the NHS or speaking about it because of the referendum. I started following the story in 2011 because I just couldn't believe what they were talking about, that they were thinking about doing. I was absolutely gobsmacked. And I started going in and gathering articles and printing out reports and looking at what was coming over the hill. And the reason I started speaking out earlier this year was we were getting absolutely no coverage up here. You would think there was a media blackout of what people in England were facing as the NHS changes came in. And I felt that people in Scotland needed to know about that before you make the decision to either keep that control or hand it back to Westminster. Because the direction of travel they're going in is utterly different from us, and something I don't think that we want to be part of. Now, what has happened in Scotland since devolution is we got rid of Mrs. Thatcher's trusts and we went back to being a single, unified, cooperative public NHS. We work right across Scotland and we work together. And that has allowed us to do some of the things Jill referred to, such as setting up the National Patient Safety Initiative, which is admired across the world to try and reduce hospital mistakes. And also what I was involved in, setting up quality treatment standards, which were set up for a lot of cancers, but I led on breast cancer. And we started that way back in 2000, and we meet every year, and we compare our data. It's put up on a big screen with all the dirty washing, all the success, all the failures. And we sit and discuss it, and we criticise each other, but we also share ideas and solutions. Because we are not rivals, we are not businesses competing for your trade. We are actually just working together in the best way of delivering the best care for breast cancer patients. And that's one of the terrible things that is being lost down south, is they're losing that cooperation. Because what's happening in England is that the NHS is being broken up and franchised out. Now, all contracts that are commissioned by GPs must be put out to tender between the NHS and private companies, and also between one NHS hospital and another. So they're all in competition with each other. And in the first year, 70% of those contracts have gone to private firms like Virgin or Atos. Now these private firms tend to cherry pick off the kind of easy stuff, the GP work or a community hospital or fit people needing a straightforward operation. And that means the NHS gets left with the more complex cases. People with difficult cancers, people with chronic illnesses like stroke or diabetes, people who have terrible accidents. They're all in the NHS hospitals. And therefore for the NHS, per patient they've treated, it has actually become more and more expensive in just that 1 year. And so at the end of that first year, more than 40% of all hospital trusts in England are in massive debt. And the government had to bail them out to the tune of almost 500 million. The year before the changes, the NHS in England actually balanced its books. So that's a huge slide to be 500 million in the black. So what's happening? Well, obviously there's lots of hand-wringing and lots of talk of it can't go on and the NHS isn't sustainable and we need to do something radical. Now, it's not politicians yet, but think tanks like the King's Fund and Reform UK are already talking about basic charges that patients would pay ranging between £5 or £25 to go and see a GP, and a similar fee if you go to accident and emergency. 50% of all NHS leaders in England who were surveyed by a group called the Nuffield Trust said they thought it was inevitable within 10 years that the NHS would stop doing certain things and would charge for other things. We weren't hearing any of that. Now, I've heard people say, who are, reasonably comfortably off, well, I would pay £10 to save the NHS, I would pay £25 to save the NHS. But I'm sorry, if you are paying £10 or £25 to go and see a doctor, you have not saved the NHS. The NHS is dead. The 66-year experiment of free healthcare at the point of need will be over. Now, I should have had an Uncle Pat, who's someone who should have been my mum's elder brother, but he died when he was quite little. He had an abscess in the back of his neck and he got blood poisoning back in the 30s because they couldn't afford the fee to call in the doctor. We don't remember that because we've become so used to the NHS. But when I worked in Gaza, I saw people die all the time for the lack of basic, free, accessible healthcare. And it's something that we all take for granted, and yet we should treasure. And the people in England are losing theirs. Now, the whole excuse given for why this big radical change would happen was to increase efficiency and decrease costs. Well, obviously on the decreasing costs, they failed utterly. But when you think about increasing efficiency, you can look up a report by a group called the Commonwealth Fund. Now, it's nothing to do with the Games. It's an American think tank that compares the American system with other health systems every 3 or 4 years. And they happen to have just published their 2014 report a couple of months ago. So if you go into Commonwealth Fund, the report itself is then called Mirror Mirror. They looked at data of 11 Western developed health services, and they used data from 2011 to 2013, so before these changes started to come in. And the UK system of just gathering in the tax and then just delivering the healthcare the best way you can came out top overall. We were number 1 in 8 out of 11 parameters. And we were second cheapest. So if we're so good at things like quality, safety, efficiency, patient access, patient-centred care, and we're second cheapest in the world, why this whole bomb going off in NHS England? In America, they spend more than twice per head we do. And that's with 40% of them having either no health care or not enough health care. So in actual fact, our health service, for all of its warts, is actually really, really good and really, really cheap. So the only excuse for what they're doing is ideological, because this is yet another government that believe in one simple thing that we've had for 35 years. Everything must be ruled by the market. Now, something that's coming round the corner that is going to accelerate that is a wee bit dry. You may have heard of it, you may not. And it's called TTIP. It's a free trade agreement that's being negotiated between the EU and America. And it's to open up free trade between the two. But what it will allow is big American companies to come into any aspect of European life that is a market. And the NHS in England is now a market. Now, other countries in Europe have asked for exemptions of some of their industries and some of their public services. But weirdly, Westminster haven't even asked for an exemption for NHS in England. And you have to wonder why. Well, to me, if you're as old as me, you might remember that Mrs. Thatcher talked about we should all take responsibility for our own health, and we should be moving steadily towards an American-style insurance-based system. Now, back then, the NHS couldn't have done it if our life depended on it. But that's where we've been moving. And Labour went along with that. They were the ones who laid the foundations. They changed the rules that allowed private companies in. The coalition have built on that. And step 4 is driving people towards private insurance. It used to be that hospitals in England were allowed to earn 2% of income by treating private patients inside an NHS hospital. That bar has been raised to 49%. The big London hospitals is still quite small, but they have raised in 1 year by about a third of what they were doing before. So the NHS, as we know it, is being allowed to decay so that people who are better off will say, well, that's just rubbish. I'm going to get private insurance. If you're wanting that direction, what quicker way to do it than to invite in big American healthcare companies who can do it in their sleep? And one of them, United Health, for whom the current chief executive of NHS England used to work, a previous advisor of Tony Blair, they are apparently already chairing a group called the Commissioning Support Industry Group. So they're already in there talking about how do we encourage the market in NHS England. Now, when I speak out about these things, I'm told that I'm a scaremonger or a liar. And yet, south of the border, Michael Meacher and Andy Burnham are jumping up and down saying exactly the same things. They're talking about charges that are creeping in around the edges for things that used to be free. They're talking about the people being driven towards taking out insurance. Andy Burnham describes the NHS in England as on a cliff edge, and if it isn't saved quickly, it will be gone in 5 years. It's almost exactly the language that I use. So what's the threat to us? Because when we ask that, how will it affect us? We get told, don't you worry your pretty little heads, it's devolved. That's the only answer that's ever given. It's devolved. So it's devolved. That means in perpetuity, nothing will ever, 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 ever affect it. We can count on 66 years of NHS to continue when it's devolved. I'm afraid that's just not realistic. The funding isn't devolved. We do not control the work of our hands. We do not control our earnings. As Jean said, we send our earnings and our pay packet to London and we get our housekeeping back. Our housekeeping is set by someone else. And our housekeeping is currently set by governments who do not believe that citizens should be able to count on these things. Our block grant has already gone down by 7% since 2010. It's already been earmarked to fall to 16% lower by 2017. That is a big hit. We can't just make that money spend in lots of different ways. But the most important thing is simply this: Westminster control our budget. I'm not talking about next year or the year after. I want you to envisage in 10 years' time, because we won't get another referendum in 5 years or 10 years. So you have to look forward. But when their citizens get nothing, when they have removed all social security from their citizens, they pay for their prescriptions. They pay over £8 a night for their prescriptions. Their children are paying £9,000 a year to go to university. So when you think that they're going to be paying 25 quid to go to a GP, you really think Westminster governments are still going to send a big pot of money up to us so that we can keep free prescriptions, eye checks, dental checks, free personal care, free tuition, and a free public NHS? I don't think that's realistic. And I think that's what you need to be thinking about. If that isn't important to you, if you see that as not a big decision or a big part of your decision, then that's fine. But I felt it was important that you go into that booth with your eyes open. I wouldn't like you to think that I'm claiming the NHS in Scotland is even remotely perfect. It isn't at all. And we face a lot of challenges. But one of our biggest challenges is our poor general health. We are still described as the sick man of Europe. And we will never tackle that until we can actually tackle the poverty that blights lives. Westminster use language like people should be just driven out. We're going to remove all their money, all their funding. We don't care that they can't eat, as if we're going to put them outside the wall in exile. But we don't actually have somewhere to put people in exile. We all pay for that failure. We pay it in benefits, we pay it in police, we pay it in prisons, we pay it in addiction services. Why not take all the money we spend on failure and invest it in the child in the first place, in early years projects, in decent start in life, in schooling, in opportunities for education? Because we need to realise that our future is our children, and that's who we should invest in. Now, I agree with David Cameron that two of the greatest things that Britain has ever done, exactly as Jean said, is the welfare state and the NHS. And they pulled that off within a couple of years of reeling out of the Second World War. That was incredible. Now, he put the BBC first. I have to say I wouldn't have put the BBC first. Nothing to do with all the referendum stuff. To me, it's a no-brainer. Free education is what was third. Free education was what allowed children who were bright, who did not come from money, to have a totally different life. I couldn't have gone to university and studied medicine if I was starting now in the English system, because I had no family support. And I couldn't have taken on what amounts to £75,000 to £80,000 worth of debt as a 19-year-old on my own in Europe. Of course I've gained from that, but I would hope my patients feel that they have gained from it as well. If we vote yes, we will not be leaving the ideals of Britain. We will be leaving because we want to hang on to them. It is Westminster that is dismembering the welfare state. It's Westminster that is privatising the NHS. And free education in England is long gone. So if these are things that we really value, that we really see as part of the heart of us, then the only way we can protect them in the future and in the long term is if we have control, if we are making the decisions. So obviously I want everyone to be thinking about that. I want us to go into that booth and be brave enough to put our mark for yes and take control. Because we are the generation who gets to make that choice for all the generations who come after. But don't expect it to be easy. It's not going to just land in our laps. It's not going to suddenly be a land of milk and honey. The next 10 years will be hard work, it will be busy, and God, it will be exciting. Because we will have to get up off our backsides, we'll have to stop whinging, stop gurning, we won't be able to blame anybody else, because the decisions will be ours. And we will have the responsibility to put our shoulder to the wheel and build the Scotland we want to leave to our children and their children. Thank you.